No one expected an ordinary night on television to turn into an arena for a verbal battle. Behind the scenes of the studio, an electric tension hung, ready to explode, and at its epicenter stood two titans of comedy, Chris Rock and Jimmy Kimmel. Their clash was inevitable, and the world didn't yet know it was about to witness one of the most tumultuous conflicts in talk show history. Before we dive into the story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the latest stories. Imagine this. You're seated in the audience of The Tonight Show, where the air hums with anticipation. Spotlights slice through the darkness, bathing the stage in a warm glow, while cameras glide over the crowd, catching the glint of eager eyes and impatient smiles. Tonight's guest isn't just a celebrity, but a person whose career has become an anthem of laughter, resilience, and truth. This is Chris Rock, a comedian, actor, and director whose jokes cut sharper than a blade and whose films provoke deep thought. But tonight, something intangible lingers in the studio, a tension that makes your heart race. Will this show be a triumph or a disaster? Chris Rock strides onto the stage to thunderous applause. His gait is confident, his navy blue suit fits impeccably, and his tie shimmers faintly under the lights. He waves to the crowd, his smile wide, but a subtle wariness hides in the corners of his eyes, as if he senses that tonight's interview will be a test. Chris is a man who has conquered stages from tiny comedy clubs to the Oscars, whose performances about racism and society have made audiences laugh and cry in equal measure. But tonight, his gaze is sharp, like a boxer before a fight. Backstage, Chris's team is on edge. His manager, Eric, whispers to the show's producer, "We agreed. No questions about Will Smith or personal dramas. Just career, movies, creativity." The producer nods, but his eyes avoid contact, his hands nervously clutching a tablet. In the control room, the show's pulse quickens. Camera operators are instructed to keep Chris in close-up, and the sound engineer checks microphones as if bracing for a storm. One assistant mutters to a colleague, "Jimmy's acting weird tonight." Too sharp. On stage, Jimmy Kimmel sits behind his desk, his signature smile, a blend of charisma and barely perceptible irony, gleaming under the spotlights. His eyes sparkle and his fingers casually flip through note cards. Jimmy is the king of late-night television, a master at balancing humor with provocation. But tonight, there's something overly deliberate in his movements, as if he's setting a trap. He casts a quick glance at his cards, and his smile sharpens, almost predatory. You, as a viewer, feel a slight chill. Is this just a play for ratings or something personal? "Chris Rock, ladies and gentlemen!" Jimmy exclaims, and the audience erupts in applause. Chris sits, adjusts his jacket, and smiles, but his eyes remain vigilant. "Chris, you look like you just stepped off the red carpet," Jimmy says, and the crowd laughs. But there's a faint jab in his tone, as if he's testing boundaries. "Thanks, Jimmy. Always nice to be here, where I can crack a joke and not get slapped for it," Chris replies with a touch of irony, and the audience roars. Jimmy laughs along, but his eyes narrow, as if accepting a challenge. "So, Chris, let's start with something easy," Jimmy says, leaning back in his chair. "Who was your first movie idol, and did you ever get to meet them?" His tone is friendly, but there's something in it that makes Chris tense slightly. Chris smiles, relaxing for a moment. "Eddie Murphy, no question. His Beverly Hills Cop blew me away as a teenager. I met him in the 90s, and he was just as charismatic as on screen. We even talked about how I used to steal his jokes for school performances." The audience laughs, and Jimmy nods, seemingly pleased. "That's cool, Chris. Any weird habits you've got? You know, something that makes people go, 'Wow, Chris Rock does that,'" he asks, and a faintly provocative note creeps into his voice. Chris raises an eyebrow but answers calmly. "Well, I collect old comedy vinyls. Pryor, Carlin, even early Bill Cosby. Sometimes I listen to them before bed to remind myself where I started. It's like meditation, just funnier." "Before bed? Really?" Jimmy repeats, his smile widening. "Sounds like you're gearing up for a big comeback. Or, a big stage where you've got to defend yourself." The audience laughs, but the laughter is uneven, as if the crowd senses a shift in the atmosphere. The camera catches Chris tensing slightly, his fingers lightly tapping the armrest. "I'm always ready for the stage, Jimmy," Chris replies, his voice taking on an edge. The audience responds with applause, but the tension in the studio grows. You, as a viewer, feel something brewing. Jimmy leans back, holding a note card. "You know, Chris, we got a ton of questions from viewers on social media. And one of them? Well, it's pretty direct." He pauses, his eyes glinting, as if savoring the moment. The audience quiets, and Chris leans forward slightly, his gaze sharpening. "Here it is," Jimmy continues with a barely there smile. "Did you ever think about going back to that Oscars moment? You know, suing Will Smith? Comedians have to protect their, let's say, stage dignity, right?" He laughs, but the laugh feels forced, and the audience responds with uneven murmurs. The camera zooms in on Chris. His smile fades, but he keeps his composure. His eyes narrow, his jaw tightens subtly. Backstage, Eric whispers to the producer, "I told you no Smith questions." The producer merely shrugs, while in the control room, a camera operator mutters, "This is going to end badly." Chris slowly leans back in his chair. "Jimmy," he begins, his voice calm but laced with a faint threat. "I'm not the type to settle things in court. I handled that situation on stage, with a mic like a comedian. And honestly, I thought we'd be talking about my new comedy here, not digging up old drama for your ratings." The audience erupts in applause, rallying behind Chris, but Jimmy doesn't back down. His smile widens, but his eyes are cold. "All right, Chris, no offense, but, you know, people want the juicy details." He pauses, then adds with feigned innocence, "Just curious how you deal with those, hits to your reputation?" The laughter in the studio is uneven, and Chris leans forward slightly, his gaze piercing Jimmy. "Hits to my reputation? Jimmy, I've been building my reputation for 30 years, from comedy clubs to the director's chair. And you? You think you can toss a jab and expect me to just smile?" The audience gasps, sensing the tension reaching a boiling point. Cameras hum, operators scramble to capture every gesture, and chaos erupts in the control room. "He crossed the line," one producer shouts. "Go to wide shot." But the cameras stay on Chris, whose eyes burn with quiet fury. Jimmy, sensing he's losing control, throws another question, this time with a cynical smile. "Okay, Chris, one more from the fans. You're from Brooklyn, right? Maybe you should go back to those comedy clubs where it all started. It's probably easier than Hollywood, no?" The studio freezes. The question lands like a veiled insult, implying Chris doesn't belong in the big showbiz world. The camera captures Chris's shocked expression, his eyes ablaze. The audience erupts in chaotic shouts, and backstage producers yell into headsets. The tension in the studio is unbearable, and you as a viewer can't look away. Imagine this moment. The Tonight Show studio holds its breath, as if before a storm. Jimmy Kimmel's words, "Maybe you should go back to those comedy clubs," hang in the air like a challenge. The audience gasps, someone mutters indignantly, and cameras hum, capturing every move of Chris Rock. His face is a mask of controlled anger, his eyes blazing, but he doesn't budge. His fingers grip the armrest, his jaw tense. In the control room, panic erupts. Producers shout into headsets, demanding a commercial break, but the director whispers, "Keep him in frame." You, as a viewer, feel your pulse quicken. This is a moment of truth. Jimmy, sensing he's losing control, tries to defuse the situation. "Chris, it's a joke. You get it. Just a fan question," he says, but his smile trembles and his eyes dart nervously. The audience reacts with a mixed murmur. Some laugh uneasily, others hiss. Chris leans forward slowly, his gaze piercing Jimmy. "No wonder I haven't been on your show in years, Jimmy," he says, his voice cutting like a blade. The audience erupts in applause, rallying behind Chris, and Jimmy flinches slightly. "You think you can throw in my face that I don't belong in Hollywood and I'll just smile?" Chris continues. "You think you can mock my career, my struggle, and it'll go unnoticed?" The camera captures his burning eyes, and the audience falls silent. Jimmy, trying to regain the upper hand, tosses another question. "Chris, come on, don't be so serious. Here's another from the viewers. Why do you always go back to old themes, racism, struggle? Maybe it's time to come up with something new? The question lands like a jab, and the audience responds with outraged hisses. Backstage, Eric mutters, "He's gonna bury us." Chris rises slowly from his chair, his posture radiating strength. "Old themes?" he repeats, his voice quivering with anger. "You call the fight for dignity old themes? You think I can just come up with something new when people still hear insults like your go back to comedy clubs?" The audience explodes in applause, and Chris steps toward the edge of the stage. Jimmy, feeling the pressure, makes a final attempt. "All right, Chris, one more from the fans. You're a comedian. Why take criticism so seriously? Maybe it's just easier to play the victim." The studio erupts in shouts of outrage, and Chris raises a hand, calling for silence. Chris takes a deep breath, his eyes scanning the audience. "Imagine this," he begins, his voice soft but piercing to the core. "Imagine a kid from Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, who at 17 stood on a comedy club stage getting booed but coming back again and again. That kid was me. I'm not a victim. I'm the one who grabbed a mic and made people laugh even when they threw insults at me." The audience erupts in ovation, but Chris continues. "I created Everybody Hates Chris to show what it was like being a black teenager in the 80s. I stood on the Oscar stage when I was humiliated in front of millions, and I still came back with a new show. I wrote jokes about racism because it's not old themes. It's the reality I live every day. And you, Jimmy, stand here telling me to come up with something new? You say, go back to comedy clubs like I don't deserve to be here?" His voice trembles with emotion, and sobs are heard in the crowd. A woman in the front row wipes tears. A man in the back shouts, "Speak, Chris." Chris turns to Jimmy. "I'm not playing the victim. I'm fighting for respect for my work, my culture, my history. And when you throw those questions at me, you're not just joking. You're trying to erase everything I've built, but I won't let you." He turns to the audience. "You, sitting here, watching at home, you know what struggle is. You know what it's like to get up when you're knocked down. I'm here to say, don't let anyone diminish your dignity. Don't let anyone tell you you don't belong. We all deserve to be here." The audience rises, the ovation deafening. Cameras capture tears on faces, and backstage, producers are frozen. Jimmy sits, his face pale, his smile gone. Chris looks at Jimmy. "I came here to talk about comedy, about life, but you made it about respect, and I'm grateful because now everyone knows who I am." He removes his mic, places it on the desk, and walks off stage, his stride full of dignity. The audience erupts in applause that doesn't stop. As the show cuts to commercial, social media explodes. Hashtags #Team Chris and #Kimmel called out trend instantly. User at TruthTeller87 tweets, "Chris Rock just taught a masterclass in dignity. Our Team Chris." And Cinema Fan 22 adds, "His speech about Brooklyn and Everybody Hates Chris. I'm in tears." The video racks up 10 million views in an hour. The next day, headlines scream, "Kimmel defeated, Chris Rock defends his legacy." The show's ratings plummet. Advertisers pull out. Jimmy issues an apology, but Twitter responds, "Too late, Jimmy." Kimmel called out. Chris receives offers for new projects, and his speech goes viral, sparking discussions about respect and racism. He becomes a symbol of resilience, and his words, "We all deserve to be here," are quoted worldwide.